Hi, I'm Peter Laws, and welcome back to the Flicks the Church Forgot. Tonight I'm going to be speaking with the writer, producer, and director Brian Yuzna. He's been a significant force in the world of independent horror for over 30 years. He's directed cult classics like Society and the squirm-inducing Dentist series of films. He's produced key Lovecraftian films like, among others, the underseen Dagon, the brilliant and thought-provoking From Beyond, and perhaps his most influential work, Reanimator. He's made everything from comic book superhero movies with a horror twist like Faust to tense and suspenseful alien abduction films like The Progeny. And perhaps his most left field moment was also his most successful. He wrote and produced the classic Disney family film Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Now, his films are often controversial and at times surreal and even repulsive. But it's all done with an almost boyish enthusiasm that's hard not to enjoy. He's the man who brought us the first on-screen fight between a severed penis and a reanimated rat. But listen to him in conversation tonight and you'll find that as well as his mischievous sense of on-screen humour, he's also a deep and thoughtful filmmaker. Tonight, the Flicks the Church Forgot are in conversation with Brian Yuzna. Brian, imagine you were at a dinner party and you were meeting people for the first time that didn't know the sort of things you do. How would you describe what you do and the type of things you produce?
Well, normally what I tell people, if they're not in the business and they don't know me, I say I'm a filmmaker and I make low-budget horror movies.
Yeah.
And then they think, oh, filmmaker, because everybody kind of likes that.
Yeah.
And then I say horror movies, so they kind of know where I'm coming from, that it's not going to be anything respectable. I say low budget, so they don't get the idea that somehow I'm dealing with John Travolta and Tom Cruise, or you know what I mean.
Yes.
So they kind of know so that they're not projecting anything particularly on me. And then they always say, the question that I'll get next would be, oh, would I know anything that you made? And then my answer is, well, if you're a horror fan, you would.
Yeah.
And if you're not, you probably wouldn't. If they know a horror fan, or if they know somebody who's a horror fan, sometimes they say, oh, my wife is a horror fan. I don't really like those movies, but my wife is it. Or they say, oh, I just love Walking Dead.
Oh,
or
yes.
Say, or every now and again, you'll get some grown-up who actually is a horror fan. And if they're real horror fans, then there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
Because they will know the movies, and they, like the genre, who are real horror fans, are kind of odd types. That's kind of a very special type of cinephile. They know maybe Val Lewton, or they know Christopher Lee, or they know, they'll know the 80s. People usually know the movies that were happening when they were, kind of about 11 to 14, 15 years old. And that's when they start getting into horror. So whatever they saw then really has an impact on them, and they reference that a lot. And I think we all do that, because people who like horror, usually the audience is usually the ones that are going through puberty. That's the time, the psychological time of life, I think, where horror really works for you, because it's about sex and death. Yeah. Two things that you are just really becoming aware of. Not that you're not aware of sex and death when you're younger. And I certainly was marked by my first horror movies when I was much younger.
Right. Once
they get into the 18, 20, 25, 30, then it starts falling off. But for some reason, some small percentage of that group keep their interest even as they get on their whole life. And I don't know if that's like arrested development or I kept liking horror, but if I hadn't started making movies, it would have been it wouldn't have been something that I probably spent so much time with. It would have been something that I was kind of interested in, and I would probably mostly like the ones that I saw when I was a kid.
Yes. And I think I heard you say once, related to what you've just said, is that in a sense we're all, particularly us horror fans, are on a quest to rediscover that original thrill that we had as teenagers.
Yeah, I thought, of course, I thought about this a lot. You have to first contextualize my comments, which is that I was first a horror fan, a movie fan. I was a horror fan, and then it wasn't until I was 30 years old, 32 years old, that I thought maybe I could make movies for a living. So I'm not that guy who wanted to be a movie director, who wanted to be a movie maker. Back when I was at that age that people today want to be that, everybody wanted to be a novelist.
Right.
When I was in high school, the college kids, the dream was to be, to write Catcher in the Rye, or to be Hemingway, or to be Steinbeck, or to be a great novelist was the thing. That was
Did you have that dream?
No, I didn't. I read a lot. I was a big reader.
Mm-hmm.
I read a lot, everything. But I also went to tons of movies, and this isn't, almost everybody you talk to in the movie business is going to tell you that they were crazy for movies.
Mm-hmm.
This is not uncommon. I just spent all my money going to movies all weekend. And I saw I saw every type of movie. I wasn't limited.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, the things that I really liked, and the things that I liked, stuff with the fantastic, fantasy, or what I now recognize as kind of expressionistic values, expressionism.
Yes.
Surrealism. This type of thing is what the dream-like part of movies. The more fantastical, the stuff that you could never see in real life. Of course, I like the big epics as well. I like action. I like all this, but I would much rather see something where somebody went back in time, or went into a haunted house,
yes,
or there was a vampire or a werewolf. This type of stuff got me. I think so. When I got into movies, I got in as a fan, and I think that for me, I learned about movies by being in the movie business, because I thought, wow, this is a great. When I first had my taste of, shooting and editing, and I was absolutely sold. I was determined, and that led to me, kind of going into the movie business. So there's when I think about why I did horror, it was because it seemed the thing that I felt most confident with. When I decided to put all I always wanted, everything always had to be, it had to have some kind of fantasy aspect, but horror, I felt like I understood it better. I felt more comfortable there. And I'm not sure why, but I do know that my earliest memories of movies had to do with horrific scenes, and I think I think most of the people I know who are real horror fans, and I have to say that in LA there's tons of movie people. I mean, it's a great place to live if you like movies, because you can just socialize with people. Everybody is kind of an expert. Everybody has some angle or other. Even my really good friends who are really into movies, because a lot of friends I have own huge collections of movies, and even 16 millimeter back before Blu-ray. And they're real cinephiles, big time, you know. They'll have thousands of movies in their collection. They'll know so much about it. But most, I try to think of any of them that I see on a regular basis who are specifically horror fans. They all will appreciate horror. They'll love horror, but they're not like me or like certain people I know like me, to whom horror is much deeper than that. There's much more of a connection. And I think the people like that, like myself, I trace it in my own life to being kind of traumatized by horror movies when I was a little kid, when I was at a very young age. And and that trauma, I think it really marked me, and it made me nauseous. I think when the feeling of horror, it includes kind of, I think, a nausea, a feeling of nausea. And this nausea, nightmares, nausea, I think that it's almost like, I always liken it to a drug, that people who become drug addicts, they say the first time it makes them sick. Then they keep chasing that high.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the way horror works. It's like when I was young, I was fascinated by it. I was repulsed and fascinated. I didn't get to see that much because when I was growing up, there wasn't even TV in Panama where I grew up. I instead of being freaked out and never going near it again, it seems like I kept wanting to. It's kind of like I burned myself on the fire, but then I kept wanting to keep looking at the fire, getting closer, seeing how close I could get. And I think that at one point I got to a certain age and saw a certain movie in which I was able to, it was a fun horror movie. It was specifically House on Haunted Hill. And that movie was for kids, but it had real horror stuff. But I felt like I could be in control of it, like I could enjoy the scares. And that was a big moment. Then of course, I've seen stuff that really marked me. But as I got older, it seems like they quit working like that. And more than anything, I'm chasing that rush again, that nausea, that feeling of horror. And just like a dish that you maybe grew up with, like that movie Ratatouille, There's a dish that maybe your mom cooked. It could be a pie. It could be some dumb. It could be pasta. It should be some dish that you ate when you were growing up, and it may not be anything that great, but you grew up and it was so special to you, and you're probably chasing that feeling, that emotion that you get when you eat it. And I think horror I think everything works that way, but we're talking horror,
I think you've got a really good point, and I see. I mean, I'm primarily like yourself. I'm a horror fan, and horror is more than just a genre that I like. It feels meaningful to me. It gives. It makes me think. It makes me ponder. But it's been meaningful to me since I was a teenager, or before that, since I was a young child, really, or getting into approaching 8, 9, or 10. But what I've found myself is that some people think because I like horror, I really enjoy real death, or that I enjoy the idea of actual violence happening in real life. And I try to explain to them, I think sometimes I feel almost disproportionately more disturbed by real death and real violence. And I sometimes use horror as a way of me trying to deal with the fact that I'm going to die one day, or my loved ones will die. And but I find that for some people, they think horror is an opportunity for me to see a rehearsal of what I'd love to see in real life, that I'd actually like to sit and watch a man get his head chopped off.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think people who don't know horror, who aren't horror fans, I think this is a common misconception. And I'll give you the other side of that equation. I was at a film festival in Italy quite a few years ago, and I had dinner with a filmmaker, and I forget his name now. He was from South Africa, and he made a vampire movie in South Africa that was basically kind of an apartheid type movie. You know, a lot of people horror these days, and they try to make it very political because people, or they're either really concerned about that, or it's another thing that, you know, you get better reviews by critics that don't like horror. They say, oh, but it has, you know, Night of the Living Dead is awful, but oh, it's such a comment on society. And forevermore, George Romero now has been burdened with this idea that he has to have social commentary instead of just give you an effective movie. This guy from South Africa had a movie there. It was this vampire thing. And his brother had come in to enjoy the festival, and his brother was a big horror fan. His brother was a doctor who now worked ERs in London, but his main job was he was these Doctors Without Borders. He was part of that group where he was airdropped into like Angola or something and be in the middle of a tribal war where death was just rampant, where they're doing surgery 24 hours a day just trying to save a few of them. You know, just the worst you know, grotesqueries, you know, the worst slaughter. And that was how he lived. This is what he did. And I asked him, I said, how, and he was a huge horror fan. And I said, my God, I said, you're just constantly in real death and gore. He says, how on earth could you be a fan of a horror movie? And he said, oh, because it's fake. It's fake. It's great. And I thought, wow, that's another way to look at it. But I understand what you say about, I think the reason kids that are in puberty like horror, because it's a way to try to understand the subconscious or the hormonal impulses that they have, they can't understand, and deal with the fact of dying in a safe way. Deal with fear in a safe way. Deal with the unknown in a safe way. Deal with these weird, twisted feelings that you might have. And I always think it's kind of like a roller coaster at a theme park. You could get in a car and get that sense of vertigo with your friends and drive like hell on a mountain road and get the fear and the excitement of it, and you could die. Or you could do it on a roller coaster and get that vertigo and that whole fear, but it's totally safe. And a movie is safe. A movie, you go into these really difficult and maybe morbid, maybe existential, maybe very frightening situations, and you get to feel it. But you know, the light's gonna come on, and you're gonna walk out. So I do think that there is a whole issue of dealing with sex and dealing with death and dealing with pain and suffering that you get in a horror movie that is part of growing up.